All right, so from this problem, it's talking about cars at Citizens Bank Park. So what's the first part of state? Population. What would we define our population to be here? What would we define our population to be? And I would probably add what? Or at least some extent of whether you put that or on this day, and it's assuming that this day was a Phillies home game. Because that is going to be very different than if that were not the case. Possibly. What's the next thing we do? So let P be the proportion of cars parked at Citizens Bank Park during a Phillies home game. That what? And it can actually be that straightforward because we're separately defining population and proportion, even though that sounds kind of weird. Null hypothesis is going to be P what? And then our alternative instead is going to be, we think that it is. And then let alpha, does this one give us an alpha? I told you I typically tend to do that just to say I chose this. There wasn't one in there. Plan. What's the first part of plan? What is our method? I think I talked about this in my last class and not this class yesterday. Before, why did I write Z star instead of just Z? It was positive and negative, so that like when I was doing it in an interval of P hat plus minus, and then a plus minus Z star, that's kind of weird. But in this case, they're only plus minus if it's not equal to, if it's two-tailed. But also critical value is the distance from 0. So it's not wrong to put that, but in this chapter I kind of stopped putting star because it's not always plus minus. But it really doesn't matter which one you put. What's my next thing? And what do I need to write there? What about normal? And n times 1 minus P naught. So in last chapter, it gave us in the problem our number of successes and we just wrote it there. That is not the case now because this is like taking our sample and hypothetically applying the claimed null to that. So it's not going to give you number of successes in a problem for this type of thing. So we would actually have to multiply. What is our n? We're multiplying 210 times, which gives me which is greater than or equal to 10. And then we're also dealing with 210 times what? Which gives us still greater than or equal to 10. And then we would write something along the lines of there are at least And I'm going to write this one the way it technically should be written, but not necessarily the way I'm going to grade it. There should be at least 10 cars parked at Citizens So the should be part is technically the way it should be written, but I don't care if you're not being that specific, because this doesn't mean there actually were that many that day. There should be at least 10 cars parked at Citizens Bank Park on the day of a home game. This is the weird thing is, if you say it's theoretically, it is there should be at least 10 parked at Citizens Bank on the day of Phillies that were sampled. But most of you are not going to think to do this, and that's the part I'm not going to count off for. And I am not that picky about this part in this chapter, because we are now applying a hypothesized value to a sample size, and it's not like we actually counted how many there were. So technically it is more correct to say it that way, yes. And then how do I finish that? Let me finish with independent, which is 10% condition, which people are starting to forget to write. So I'm taking capital N is greater than or equal to n lowercase n. Our lowercase n is what? So then I need to say there are at least what? Cheat and copy. Cars parked at Citizens Bank Park on the day of a Phillies home game. That one has to be specific to population, and that one is something that I would count off for. And you could even mention the fact that it told us there were 21,000 parking spaces, making sure that we knew that that criteria was met. Do what do I need to write there? How do I find p hat, or what is p hat? Which is what number over what number? Over. And this one ends up giving you a repeated number. Did anybody write down what the simplified fraction was? 5 over 30, but no. 5 over 30, 1 over 6, yes. So some people might choose to do that instead, so that they're not using a rounded number. I don't care if you do. I just don't like leaving it that. What's next? Which is what else? P naught, which is how many tails? And alpha. So my generic equation starts with what? P hat minus P naught. And then so down here, you're plugging which one in those? So plug in my numbers, 1/6 minus 0.12, square root of 0.12 times 0.88, divided by 2 to 10, and you end up getting a test statistic value of about 2.08. Why do I usually choose to stop it at 2.08? Because Z and Z, I usually write to 2 decimals. If you write 2.83, that's fine. 2.083, that's fine. So draw it. That number is positive. Which way do I shade?
Right.
And what do we end up getting as a p-value? And yours might be slightly off from this. If you went to 2.083, you end up getting like 0.0816, I think. So depending on how many you run the two there, it's going to change that. And we're comparing it to alpha of 0.05, and we know that this one is so our conclude we what? Reject the null hypothesis that p equals 0.12 since why? Which means that we have enough and you could either write in words here that what did the problem ask? So writing that would be like the context way of saying it, or you could end it with is questions with homework.